So let's talk about justice. Justice doesn't fit nicely in the system that Aristotle laid out for virtues, other virtues of character, virtues like courage or even temperament or temperance. Nevertheless, Aristotle developed a very important theory of justice as a virtue, which we will be following in this text. So, the first thing to notice about Aristotle's treatment of justice is that he breaks justice up into several kinds. And I actually find all of these labels to be very helpful in thinking about practical issues. The first division that he makes is between formal justice and justice in a context. And all of this is in your text. He says the basic idea of justice in a completely abstract sense is simply treating similar cases similarly. That may seem empty, and it kind of is. It might seem abstract, and it is. But it conveys one basic idea, which is that justice is a matter of being consistent. Okay, let's take a simple case of unfairness. There's a basketball game. Two teams are playing. In one case, there's something that looks kind of like a foul, and the ref doesn't call it. In another case, you have a situation that's exactly the same in terms of like what people did, when, who hit who and when, and that sort of thing. It's the exact same thing physically, but the ref does call it this time, and he calls it because he has been bribed to throw the game for one of the teams. Right? This is clearly a case where someone is being unfair, right? If the ref has been bribed, the game is unfair. Well, we can think about this in terms just by looking at similar cases. In each case, the foul was exactly the same, right? The cases were similar. But the ref did not treat them similarly. He called one and he didn't call another. He was making special concessions for the people who had bribed him. Right? Try another case of unfairness. Two people apply for the same job. Their resumes are identical. Their experience is identical. Their education is identical. One person gets the job and the other person doesn't because one person is friends with the company owner. It's unfair again. You had cases that were perfectly similar, but one was treated differently for reasons that aren't relevant. So that's the essence of fairness. The problem is understanding what counts as similar, right? What factors do you exclude in decision making, and what factors do you include? So, in the job application situation, generally, you are supposed to exclude issues like race, gender, religion, right? Those are considered not relevant. And so if one person was accepted and another person wasn't, because of their gender, that would be considered unfair. There are, however, situations where suddenly these things do become relevant, right? Religious institutions are allowed, in certain circumstances, to favor members of their own religion. If you are applying for a job as a priest in a Catholic church and you are Jewish, it is not discrimination if you are excluded, right? If you are applying to play the role of Juliet in a Shakespeare play, and you are a 7-foot-tall male, it's legitimate to exclude you. So there are situations where different things become relevant. Suddenly, you are allowed to take them into account, and you're still treating similar cases similarly. What counts as a relevant thing can be very controversial. So some people will say that you should take into account things like race and gender if it's a matter of affirmative action for a group that has previously been discriminated against. Other people will say, no, that doesn't count as relevantly similar, and in fact, you're being unfair. So again, justice here is a matter of consistency, and the controversy comes in deciding what ideas you should be consistent to. So in the abstract, we just say that justice is treating similar cases similarly. But, of course, we're going to have to get more concrete than that. And so we have justice in context. And that is the situation where you explain what counts as similar in this context. So you say, I am casting Juliet, and I am going to discriminate against men because that's what I need for this rather traditional performance. Although I suppose if you actually, if you really wanted to perform it the way Shakespeare did, you would discriminate against women because all of the female roles were played by men in Shakespeare's time. Whatever, right? When you establish the context, you have to explain what counts as similar. Now, justice is a preeminent social virtue. Actually, back when we were discussing emotions, we talked about the evolutionary roles of some of our moral emotions, right? So we talked about caring, the care that we instinctively feel for helpless infants. This was a moral emotion, allowed our species to survive by strengthening family bonds. We also have an emotional, intuitive sense of fairness. There is an emotional underpinning to the idea of, well, treating similar cases similarly. And it comes out best in reciprocity situations. It is absolutely amazing how much you can influence people by giving them tiny little gifts, right? If I just give you, okay, so here's the study. The psychologists decide to recruit people to work in a soup kitchen, or some charity, and it's a pretty hefty duty. It's a pretty hefty commitment. So people who agree to do this are actually promising a lot of their time. There are two conditions. In one condition, they just send out people to knock on doors and ask will you volunteer at our soup kitchen? In the second condition, they knock on people's doors and they say, here, have a free pencil. Pencil. And then they say, would you like to volunteer at our soup kitchen? And they get a better response. In general, once you give something to someone, they feel like they owe you. Reciprocity, the feelings that, you should return favors, and for that matter, you should return harms, right? If someone punches you, you want to punch them. That's built into the same notion of fairness, rather than the same set of instincts regarding fairness, right? Reciprocity. You help people who help you, you hurt people who hurt you. That's an underlying instinct. Okay, this was different than the instincts surrounding care for the weak, right? When you feel the urge to help a baby, it isn't because the baby helped you. You don't owe the baby. Instincts regarding fairness come from promoting cooperation between families, right? As a species, we survived not just because we cared for our young, but because we were willing to care for the young of people we weren't genetically related to. We cooperated at a tribal level rather than just a family level, right? So that's where the instincts of justice come from. And we learn to cooperate at a tribal level by being consistent, by treating similar cases similarly. Well, when we begin to fill out what it means to treat similar cases similarly, we need to think about the social context. This is preeminently a social public virtue. And so there are two aspects of this social public virtue. One is what Aristotle calls rectifying justice, or maybe retributive justice. This is the kind of justice that you deal with when things have gone wrong. So if I just said, I know I've talked about justice a lot, so I've spoiled any word associations you might have. But generally, if I just said, what's the first word that pops into your mind, or what's the image that pops into your mind when you think of justice? Well, we'll try it anyway. What do you think of?
Paying someone back.
Paying back, yeah. Reciprocity.
Revenge.
Revenge. What did you say?
Like a judge.
Like a judge. I think our biggest associations with justice is criminal justice, right? So this is the batch of justice that Aristotle refers to as rectifying. This is the kind of justice you deal with when something has gone wrong. Normal society has fallen out of whack, and you need to determine how to fix things, right? There's a whole other side of justice that has actually been more of the focus of a lot of philosophy recently. This is distributive justice. And this is actually justice in the ordinary workings of society. So it's not what to do when someone does something wrong, it's what do we do normally? It's called distributive justice because for the most part it's about distributing burdens and benefits of society. It is roughly about the right to eat and the duty to work. Right? So you've got benefits of society, the food we produce, the roads, shelter, bridges, and the work that goes into maintaining society. Right? In the last section of the text, we will look in detail actually at a philosopher named John Rawls, who comes up with a very famous theory of distributive justice. But we can put that on hold for a while. In the meantime, what's important to see here is that we can ask whether the games we're playing are fair, even when the rules aren't being broken. Right? Okay, so we've got this general sense of the framework of justice. And in that framework, we need to think of two aspects of justice. First of all, there is fair-mindedness. Now we're back to virtues, which is a personal trait. Right? Fair-mindedness is the character trait, the disposition that allows you to be just. And in addition to that, we can talk about fair practices. Because this is a social virtue, right? You don't just have just individuals, we have just societies. And some interesting things happen when there's a mismatch between them. What do you do if you're a fair-minded individual in a practice that is itself not fair? Well, we can talk about that later. Right now, I just want to outline some conditions that Lischka puts on fair individuals and fair practices. So this is fair-mindedness or justice as a virtue. This is from page 171. The fair-minded person is someone who wants to give others their due. To treat similar cases similarly, give each their due, do what you're, be consistent in a cooperative arrangement set up for the collective good. There are a number of character traits that go with being a fair-minded person, engaging in these cooperative relationships. First of all is actually just the tendency to join them. Being willing to volunteer to cooperate, right? Rather than being an isolated individual. This is a moment where we are chimpanzees and not orangutans, right? So two of our close cousins, the chimpanzees, live in societies. Orangutans are solitary. Human beings are more like chimps than orangutans. We want to join cooperative arrangements. Babysitting collectives, study groups. You get together, we study for the test over the weekend with other people in the class. It's a cooperative arrangement aimed at your mutual benefit. Okay. There's no fair-mindedness unless you start joining these arrangements. Once you're in these arrangements, you ask for your fair share and no more than that. I think this is important. If you have a babysitting cooperative, you will expect someone else to be watching your child some of the time, right? So if the agreement is that everyone gets 1 day a week, all the kids come over to your house, that is, you ask for, you expect to take 1 day and you expect to have your kids at the other people's houses the other 4 days. So fair-mindedness is not total self-sacrifice, right? A fair-minded person expects rewards and asks for no more than they're supposed to get. You play by the rules. You are impartial in the sense that you don't play favorites based on who the person is. Right? The way that judges and referees are supposed to be impartial. And finally, and I think this is a very important one, you desire to see justice done so that it bothers you not just when you are cheated, it also bothers you when someone else is cheated. So for the longest time, I've been using babysitting cooperatives as an example here, although the actual babysitting cooperative that I was involved with was long ago, because about 5 years ago. My kids are no longer tiny little babies. But when they were tiny little babies, we had this we lived in another state. We had a babysitting cooperative with our neighbors. So one day a week, all the kids in the neighborhood piled into our house, right? And the other 4 days a week, they were at someone else's house. One semester when we were working out these plans, my wife said, we can actually probably take the kids 2 days a week. It's fine. We'll do 2 days, everyone else can do 1 day. And one of the other moms in the cooperative said, no, I'm not going to let you do that. Even though she would be advantaged by this, right? I mean, it would be to her advantage to dump more work on our family. But our friend didn't do that. And primarily it was because of a desire to see justice done, right? You want the whole arrangement to be fair, not just beneficial to you. So this is the virtue of fair-mindedness. These are the kinds of people we want in a cooperative venture. Okay. Cooperative ventures, though, are no good. Well, cooperative individuals are no good if they are stuck in systems that are themselves unfair, right? If you're playing by the rules and the rules are crooked, then no one is helped, right? So the other thing that Lishka needs to define here is what counts as a fair practice. Okay. So this is from page 173. These are elements of a fair practice. If something is a fair practice, it is equitable in that rules are applied equitably, equally. We don't play favorites. The rules don't play favorites. It is mutually advantageous. Everyone who participates in the system gets something out of it, right? So if you are contributing to the babysitting cooperative, then your baby is being watched at some point. You are not just watching people's babies for no reason, for no benefit to yourself. How the mutual benefits are distributed it can vary from system to system. Maybe you will decide to all agree that some people do have to watch all the kids 2 days a week and some people don't. But as long as everyone's receiving some benefit, the system can count as fair. All right. So, actually, I'm going to go ahead and put some synonyms in here that would be helpful. Equitable. Rules are applied without reference to persons. So we can call this, in fact, the rule of law, not people. Okay. Actually, let's do that one down here. The rules serve as a final court of appeal, so we can think of this as the rule of law. Right? Rule of law. Ultimately, what decides things are the rules, not one individual who's considered the authority figure. The old phrase from the founding of our country was rule of law, not of men. Also, rules are public, so we're going to call this transparency. And these two go together. You cannot have the rule of law unless the rules are public. If decisions are being made in secret, if you can be arrested and they won't tell you what charges you're arrested on, then you don't have transparency. Without transparency, you don't have justice. And finally, you need informed consent. no one is drafted into a fair procedure, right? You agree to it, knowing what you're getting into. Okay. So that's a fairly long overview of justice. I include it because it can be on the test. I include it because it's important, and that sort of thing. I don't have an exercise that goes with this one, though, so it hasn't been very interactive. Are there questions?